The ideas expressed in the following presentations are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of ACI or its committees.
My name is Larry Tabor. I'm the current co-chair of the Curing Committee. In terms of learning objectives, we have to state this, but basically you should be able to look at the importance of external curing, provide durable concrete. You want to identify different curing methods and their impact on long-term curing of concrete, pavements, and slabs and grades. Describe the process of using drinking water treatment waste as an alternative cement filler. And then lastly, discuss the use of early wet curing on concrete to minimize bridge deck cracking, which is an important topic. My topic, though, I am Lawrence Tabor, or Larry Tabor. I am the current chair of the Curing Committee. I also, as a paying job, I work for Black & Veatch. I'm a structural engineer there. And my topic today really is talking about the guide, but the guide doesn't have enough, I would say, truly to fill a full half hour in what we're changing. So I decided to add a little bit more information about what we have product-wise, as well as a little bit more just general information about the guide, maybe where we're going. So what do I cover today? Curing documents overview. What do we offer as a Curing Committee and as ACI, of course? And did we need to update the guide to curing? Because that often is a question. Then what changed? Stuff changed, right? We don't like change. Change sucks. But we'll do change. What's next for the guide? Where are we going next? So our first document that I was going to talk about is the Curing Specification. The Curing Specification, it's officially titled 308.1-11 is the current version. There's a metric version. It's -1M. We're real creative with that. It is a reference specification. What a reference specification means is you can reference it in your contractual documents. So in your project specifications, you say CE ACI 308.1, and that covers your curing. Now, there's a catch, a couple of catches. We'll get to those in a second. But they do provide the requirements for various ways to cure concrete elements. I said requirements. I didn't say some guidance. I said requirements. It does apply to external curing. Internal curing is not covered currently by the specification. It is written in mandatory language. The word shall is used, not should, not must, not needs to, not really good idea. Shall. It does use a standard 3-part specification format. This is a biggie. Do not reference it if you are referencing 301. So in a project specification, you can reference 301. 301 is more specifications of concrete construction, right? So it's the bigger picture, but it has a section in there for curing. So if you reference this one and 301, you run a strong risk of getting conflicting requirements, and that can get you in trouble. So you don't want to reference 301 and 308 at the same time. It does contain 3 checklists. The 3 checklists you do need to look at, you do need to work on, because I said there's a catch. That's one of the catches. There are some mandatory requirements, some things that you need to do. There's some optional requirements, and then there's some submittals that you should be getting from the contractor. I'd say you, but if you're a contractor, you should be submitting to the engineer, depending on what your role is. Those 3 items need to be performed. You can't just simply say use 308. I've seen that happen. And incidentally, don't just say use 308. Don't even say use ACI 308, because I'm looking to say, do you mean the guide is 308R? Do you mean the specification 308.1? You need to be exact in your reference. The checklist and the optional stuff is all up front. It covers that. There's a kind of a how to use this specification in there. It works pretty well. It covers cast in place concrete. So the guide, which is really what we're here to talk about this morning, or this afternoon, whatever time it is. The current version is the 2001 edition. It's 308R. We did reapprove it in 2008. Reapproval per ACI rules basically means we updated kind of the front stuff, who's on the committee, and a few references, so maybe some new ASTM references, things like that, and that's it. There's no technical changes. Those are not allowed in a reapproval. So that was not done. Obviously, it's a guide, so it provides guidance on curing practices, procedures, materials, and monitoring methods. It's the I don't know what I'm talking about, I need to go learn more about it book. It's not a spec. It's written in more complete language than a spec. It's not as forceful. The updated version, as I say, is in its final throes of being done. We have a few more discussions to have, hopefully on Wednesday, and then hopefully we'll have it right back. and all TAC comments are to be addressed and everything else. We have addressed TAC comments. We've gotten responses from them as responses to our responses. So we now need to go through and fix that up. It should be done this year. So as I mentioned, it does not have mandatory language. It uses the word should, or here's some things kind of stuff. It's not a shall. There's no shall in the guide. You want to use it if you're learning about concrete curing. You don't want to use it as a reference. I'm going to restate that. Do not reference 308R. It will get you in trouble. And the reason why I restate this is I see it all the time in specifications. And you contractors in the room, please don't be too harsh and take advantage of the situation too badly, but I know that it does open them up. The committee is responding, like I said, to the TAC comments. The updated version would be done soon. All right, so the third document, which is a relatively new document, does cover internal curing. Recall that I said the other stuff does not cover internal curing. This is where we cover it. So this is a report. The current version, it's a joint committee, so it has a fun name, ACI 308/213R-13. It's a 2013 document. It does provide an overview of using lightweight aggregates for doing internally cured concrete. And the name does get kind of long, Report on Internally Cured Concrete Using Pre-Wetted Absorptive Lightweight Aggregates. I'm not going to say it was a joint committee and there was a long struggle to get to that point, but we got to that point. The technology is becoming more popular. You're going to see it more and more. This is not an internal curing presentation. We have John Roberts coming up later this evening to talk about that. But the technology, suffice to say, is becoming more popular. Internal curing, my plug, does not replace external curing. Make sure that you're still doing external. So when should I use what? As I said, only reference the specification on your projects. Do not reference the guide. The guide is for learning more about various techniques, various processes, procedures, things like that. It's the state of the art on the subject. Okay, so it's considered, here's what we best know as we update it. These is the latest research and things like that. The report on internal curing covers that topic very well. That it goes in depth. It provides a lot of resources, a lot of references, a lot of past historical projects, things like that. So if you need internal curing, that's your report. The basic question to ask yourself is, do you need information or do you need to tell a contractor what to do? If you need to tell a contractor what to do, that's the spec. If you need information, that's the guide. So why did we update it? Well, number one, ACI tells us we have to. That's one thing. It has sunset rules and requirements in order to maintain its relevancy within the industry and to meet the various standardization boards. In order to meet all that, you have to update your documents within a set period of time. It's also, more importantly, though, it's fundamentally required. Things change. How many contractors do we have in the room that have been doing this stuff for 30 years? 30 years is the number, guys. I see one, maybe two. Curing hasn't changed a whole lot, okay? But there are things and new technologies that have. So that stuff needs to get put in there. So some of the curing technologies, some of the newer research, the construction types have changed as well. There's types that we didn't think about 30 years ago. This document is from 2001, which the reality means it was 2099 that we really were updating this thing. It's 15 years old. That's half of that 30. We needed to update it. So beyond, like I said, the relevancy, we also see that there's, of course, errors and omissions, things that we, missed up. This guide has been around for a long time, and we're continuously updating it. As we add something and change something just in the process, things got dropped accidentally or got switched around to where they no longer made sense. We had to do something, so that's the one reason. And of course, like I said, they're supposed to be state of the art. So how is the guide organized? In this particular instance, I am talking about the new guide. This is set far enough along, there's no debate over this portion and frankly any of it. Chapter 1 is an introduction, obviously. What is curing when you need it? There is some discussion about modifying this for the next edition, but this introduction is a little more detailed and involved than a traditional introduction might be. It does a good job, I think, of talking on the various matters. Chapter 2 is definitions. That is a very short chapter. That is a new twist to it. ACI now requires guides to have definitions defined. However, they would prefer, and we have followed that we rely on the Concrete Terminologies document, which is now officially known as CT-13. They're looking to update that in the future, but currently that's what it is. And it literally has two definitions and is 6 inches tall. Chapter 3, curing methods and materials. That, of course, curing methods, when to stop them, what to do, how long to do that kind of thing. But the trick is we have a lot of different types of concrete, right? So we can't catch it all. So we try to catch most of it, but there's still different types of construction that we need to cover differently or in more depth, if you will. That's what Chapter 4 is for. Pavements, building, bridges, mass concrete, that kind of thing. And as you'll see, as we discussed, there is even other stuff that's what we consider more specialty concrete that is not covered even in this guide. there's a table referencing you to other places which we felt covered it adequately enough, and we didn't want to have duplicate information with competing additions and updates and everything and getting everybody confused. So we just say, go see them. We're comfortable with that. Chapter 5 is, okay, you're curing it, right? How do we know it's working or doing well and its effectiveness? So there's some various conditions, evaluating them, making sure the curing is working, the impact, things like that. And chapter 6 is references. All right, so when did we last change? I mentioned it was a 2001 document. A reapproval was done to comply with the sunset rules. That was done in 08. And since then, we've been working on a fresh total rewrite of it, which is a true update, not just a reapproval. One of the changes is it does have a new name. Why does it have a new name? Well, the new name is Guide to External Curing of Concrete. So instead of Guide to Curing Concrete, there's a couple new words there. Not a big change, but it does recognize, and if the driver is internal curing, and that process and that technology has driven a change toward this document, the committee felt that we needed to differentiate and further clarify this document specifically is referring to external curing measures, stuff that you do from the outside, not internal curing, which is what you would do from the inside. So the change was better reflected what it actually deals with. It was a last-minute change. It actually didn't occur until a year ago. It was fairly last minute. So chapter 1, what did we change? Not much, honestly. We had a lot of additional citations to new references. There's some things that added. Again, this document hadn't really been updated for 15 years. Research had taken place. The key thing here is we do direct the user to the internal curing report. So it was a chicken and egg for a while, which one was going to get out first. The report sort of won. We kind of made a preference to get that one out first. So the report won, so that way we're able to reference it in this document, because we were trying to figure out, and we were struggling with how to reference internal curing in this document, because it's a big enough topic we couldn't just ignore it, but we didn't want to put it in this document at this time. We started doing that, and it became a very invasive thing that's going to require a lot more effort. It does add information on the effects of elevated curing temperatures. You're going to see that in the next several slides. Elevated curing, be it steam curing or true accelerated curing, or even in a mass concrete text. That stuff is dealt with more in this document. Sustainability, of course, is encouraged to be included in all documents. We have done the same, and how it relates to curing. So chapter 2, definitions. Like I said, very short chapter. 2 definitions other than the reference to CT13. One is the curing affected zone, which basically is that small surface right at the top of the concrete that, except for strength and some other things, is highly important to a lot of people. And in some industries, that is all they care about. Evaporativity is the other definition. But like I said, most of them are already included in CT13 and are not included in this document. Chapter 3, materials and methods, or methods and materials, as you might be reading on the screen. It's simplified scope. We felt that the scope had a lot of extraneous information in it. We tried to clarify, clean it up, things like that. But it talks about the curing methods in the materials section. And frankly, it kicks you better to 308.1, our sister document. Rather than duplicating information in the whole should and shall thing and trying to say it just differently, we send you to 308.1. Fauna curing measures. We do talk a little bit more about that and what fauna curing measures you might want to use, current practices, environmental concerns, things like wash, your runoff, right? Making sure your runoff's not getting into somewhere where you don't want it to get into. I've recently had a project that was on a very, very pristine river, and the contractor did not want to use wet curing, even though we required it, because of the runoff. And we said, you're right, and we switched products. Better referencing to elevated curing temperatures when discussing accelerated curing. This is something that had been in the works for many years prior to me even joining the committee, and we finally getting it in there. There is a new table that discusses this, which I will have in just a second, but that's one of the more significant changes, I would say. This is the table. It's obviously copied out from there. But basically, it discusses what to do when we say 158. What we really mean is 160, according to ACI 301, right? No, there is a debate between 158 and 160. It comes down to how you're converting from 70 degrees Celsius, which is the number, whether it's soft conversion, hard conversion, based on what the research was done at. So 158 is on the table right now. I think editorially it will change to 160 before it's actually published, just to make note of that. But basically, we're introducing ways that if you do go above 160, you should do something. And here's some things you might do. And that's unique and new, I think. It's not found in a lot of documents. 201's working on some stuff, but in general, it's not found in other documents. And then what we are saying is don't go above 185. That's your top. And the risk is delayed etcher night formation, for those who aren't aware of this. Chapter 4, curing for different types of construction. So here's where we get into bridge decks and other mass concrete, things like that. There were general revisions. Basically, there's certain current industry practices that are out of date from 15 years ago. So this got that up to date. But there's also a new section on moisture-sensitive flooring, which is a hot topic in the industry, has been for several years. And then another hot topic has been mass concrete. So guess what? We have mass concrete. We've always had it, but we've beefed it up. So this provides recommendations on some sensors and some way to monitor it and measure it, and then also to perhaps reduce some thermal shock, which is another hot topic right now. Chapter 5, monitoring curing and curing effectiveness. Same story, general revisions. There is now a reference to an electronic nomograph for the evaporation nomograph. You might be familiar with it within ACI 305. It's the same one. 308 has the same one. The interesting fun part, I would say, is this little line here that says ACI now has an app for the iPhone as well. So if you have an iPhone, ACI's main app has a section in there for curing, and the evaporation, it does the math for you. It does have a feature where it will go and reach out to the nearest weather station, pull in that data. One caution with that, and you will see there's a heavy caveats within that, is that's not actually measuring the actual where you're supposed to measure. You're supposed to be 20 inches off the ground and at the project site and all this business, not a mile away at the nearest weather station. Just warning you on that, but lack of any other data, at least you have something. It is out there. We also had a discussion on curing meters, curing compound effectiveness evaluation, and things like that. Chapter 6, this is the great one, right? Because it's the end, right? We updated references based on additional items in the guide and some other changes there. New references, nothing big deal. So here's where it gets a little more fun. Where does the future hold? Where are we going with this? Obviously, we're getting this version out. We immediately can start working on a rewrite, right? Might take us another 8 years to get that done. So there were several items that were considered new business that we said, you know what, it's going to be too invasive in this particular document. We got to get it out. So let's put it in the next edition, or at least look at it for the next edition. I mentioned earlier one of them would be internal curing and how it's incorporated, if it's incorporated. At some point, there's at least a reference, obviously, but how is that incorporated? Looking at the rework of the organization the introduction chapter, as I mentioned, is fairly lengthy. Parts of it fit better in other chapters, but we didn't want to take the time. This came as a TAC comment. We didn't want to take the time to just completely rework the whole thing. We said, we'll do that later. But obviously, there's new technologies. I mentioned drip ring fans. That's something specifically that has been indicated that we need to look at. But there's obviously new technologies and new ways that we're curing and new things that we're doing that we need to obviously do. The other thing which we are doing, and this is where I'm going to mention a little bit more of the story behind it, but within ACI 310 and 308, 310 is decorative concrete. We have a task group between decorative concrete and curing, meaning decorative curing is what I'm trying to get to, my bad. So we have a task group on decorative curing. The industry tends not to cure based on what we would say in the guides and in the specs, because remember, they care about that top surface, that very interfacial zone. So there's some debate right now on how best to do that. Some contractors have taken the approach of we're just not going to do anything. And at 308, we said, we're not really comfortable with that. You need to do something. As another gentleman says, if it dries, it dies. And with curing, that is extremely true. So we need to look at how that is interacted. What we realize in this process is there needs to be some new research. So for those of you who aren't aware, we're going to be submitting some proposals for research. And basically, if formula release agents and some other things are good curing agents. Right now, we don't have an idea. We don't have research to prove that they're effective. So there's various things like that we're looking at. And the hope would be that would be completed, and then we can incorporate that into the guide. Obviously, I mentioned for the nomograph, the little 20 inches and all that business, it was stated that they'd prefer we had a little diagram for that. So obviously that kind of stuff's in there. Another interesting thing that came out is plastic sheeting, right? How much do you overlap it? How much do you guys overlap it, out of curiosity? A foot? Anybody do 6? Anybody do 18? What's right? Nobody says. What's effective? What works? So as a committee, we decided that we didn't want to just throw a number in there. We wanted to actually make sure we thought about it and make sure there wasn't any research on that. So hopefully we'll have something on that eventually. So here I mentioned the audience participation earlier. This is where, honestly, as the chair of 308, I want your feedback. There are tech notes available. So just as a general comment, ACI has a type of document called a tech note, which is a very narrowly focused single topic item. We've talked for several years now on whether or not to do tech notes for curing, such as residential curing, for instance. Not curing as a whole, focused. And the thought would be they're very practice-oriented. They're written not in legalese. They're just very clean documents, 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 pages, but not much beyond that. We have come up with residential curing as a possibility, but there's obviously other types. And frankly, I'm going to have a conversation in my committee meeting on Wednesday about this, and I wouldn't mind hearing if you have other thoughts. So yes, we do have 3 documents: specification, the guide, and then report on turner curing. The new guide should be out this year. I don't see why it wouldn't be unless we had a serious hiccup that I'm not expecting. The internal curing report is published, and we did change our name. So elevated curing is one of the biggest items. Some final curing things were discussed. Mass concrete we also dealt with in a little bit better manner. And don't forget the iPhone app if you have an iPhone. I'm not sure if ACI is planning on working one for Droid or not. I would prefer it is because I have a Droid. So I'm pushing for that. But we did provide other guidance. And like I said, there's lots of new business. So now, perfect timing. Yes, sir.
Can you give us some information about what are the significant differences between 308 and 301 in the curing that you mentioned earlier?
Okay. So the question was, what are the differences between 308 and 301 in terms of curing? 301 takes, you can say, the relative thicknesses of it. What the guide to curing does in several pages, I lost track of what the final count would be, but in a heck of a lot more pages than 301. So 301 is a very short version. It's very abrupt. It doesn't get into some of the other things to look for. So I want to say the curing spec is like 12 pages, and in 301 it's maybe half a page. I can't say the specific differences, but it's just not nearly as in-depth. So which means some of the requirements are not included. And understand that 308 would be a more appropriate to use if you're not referencing 301 already in your project specifications. That's truly really what the difference is. If you're referencing 301, then they've already got you covered. And typically in projects where you reference 301, it's a smaller project where you don't need all those requirements. Whereas in larger projects, you would typically have your own project specification for concrete, and that might reference 308. Thank you.